We're going to give everyone just about 5 more minutes and then we're going to get started here today. So just bear with us. I think it has been about 5 minutes. So good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our 6th webinar of the CLM series on maximizing manure and nutrient management. I'm Jocelyn Burt. Some of you might not know me. I am the newest water quality extension associate for Allen, Auglaize, and Mercer counties. If I can get this to go, perfect. And then this is just a little bit about our team. You can see everyone's faces and where they are located. We have 6 members on our team. So if any of those fall in your counties, feel free to reach out to them with any questions. This is just an overview of our webinar. So Paige is going to be up first. She's with Legacy Farms doing a presentation on next level nutrient management. And then we will have Samuel Mullins with ODA doing a little update and overview of some changes. And then we will have Megan and Eric with WD Farms on finding black gold in manure lagoons. And I'm going to stop sharing, and Paige, you should be up.
Okay, awesome. I'm using a Bluetooth microphone thing, so if you cannot hear me very well, just let me know.
I can hear you. Are you able to share your screen?
Yep, working on it right now.
Perfect.
Okay. Can you see this okay?
Yep. And actually,
Perfect.
before you get started, we're going to have a quick poll here. And if you all could just answer that real quick, it's just kind of an introductory poll. All right, Paige, you are free to start your presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So my presentation is called Next Level Nutrient Management, not necessarily because there's anything that's like super advanced or anything crazy about what we do, but it's more so about why at Legacy Farmers we find nutrient management so important and why we dedicate so many resources to it. My name is Paige Fitzwater, and I'm the Precision Services Manager at Legacy Farmers Cooperative, which is based out of Findlay. We have 5 agronomy locations that kind of make a big circle around Findlay. One in Custer, Ohio, one in Arlington, Arcadia, Macomb, and Pandora. And even before the rollout of H2 Ohio, we were pretty involved in nutrient management, and we were a company that ODA kind of chose to pilot the H2 Ohio program, but just not really under H2 Ohio name. It was just a nutrient management program here, and we implemented that and gave our feedback. And then obviously the H2 Ohio program rolled out, which really blew up the number of nutrient management plans in specifically the Western Lake Erie Basin. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we handled that and why I think what we did worked so well. Because if you've ever written a nutrient management plan, especially on like a retailer level, like offered it as a service, you probably know that it's quite a big undertaking. Let me see. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why, from a farmer's perspective, I think working with a specialist is important. And when I say specialist, I just mean like a company who specializes in nutrient management plans or has somebody who has kind of dedicated their resources to that. And then from a retailer's perspective, why I think having a specialist is important. But I did this presentation one other time, and before I did that, I kind of got a gauge of how many farmers were listening, how many retailers were listening, how many soil and water employees were listening. So I'm just going to talk about this like objectively with not really focusing on one or the other, but I think both sides of it are important, or all 3 sides, I guess. And then I'll talk a little bit about what the main components are to how I do nutrient management, why I think it's so successful here. And then if I have enough time, we'll talk a little bit about EQIP, which is, in my opinion, just a little bit different than a program like H2 Ohio or really any other nutrient management plan that you write for a program. So why work with a specialist from a farmer's perspective? And I have a couple of different bullet points here that I'll talk a little bit about, but the first one is specialization. When I'm talking to growers, the biggest hurdle that they have, I think a lot of people are fully capable to writing nutrient management plans, especially farmers, because they understand like what goes in and out of their farms, like removals and applying nutrients and things like that. It's more so that with any sort of program, you have to think about, you keep up with deadlines, you keep up with the rules, you keep up with the communication, and all of that stuff can change. It doesn't happen very often, but having somebody who's kind of dedicated to keeping up with that and being able to interpret those and put them into I would say like grower term is such an enormous benefit to them, because they are managing their operation from the farm, which is a full-time job in and of itself. And so to have somebody that they can rely on, who they know is knowledgeable about this kind of stuff, and they can go to for questions about rates, about timing, about what can I do, what can I not do, and somebody who can interpret that into terms that apply to them. Because each operation is super specific. So some of the things, like some of the guidance and stuff, doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. But being a person who knows these operations and also spends time on just knowing what's going on at the government level or the program level is super important. And really the agronomic knowledge as well, not just talking about governmental programs, but like remove the government part from it, just a nutrient management plan in and of itself, knowing the removals and your yield and what your inputs are, and being able to balance all of that stuff out, having somebody who dedicates time to doing that is such an invaluable service. And from a farmer's perspective, not many people have the time to just sit down and like really plan that out. Maybe in the winter, but in the winter they're fixing equipment, paying bills, getting caught up on all their other paperwork, and just having somebody they can rely on for this, from what I've seen, is such an invaluable service to them. And then the next one is accuracy. So this is something that's also, I would say, equally as important as specialization, and kind of ties into the technology piece of it as well. But from my perspective, with the rollout of the H2 Ohio program, I had 110 nutrient management plans operating like under Legacy Farmers that I was kind of managing. And you have to think, I did that same thing 110 times over and over and over again. It got to a point where I was good at it. I mean, I still am good at it, but I just did it so many times that I could I had a list of questions that I would ask, and I would get the answers to those, and then I would get a feel for what the operation was doing, and what that farmer wanted to do and what his goals were for his farm, and applying that into a nutrient management plan and just doing that over and over again. I became kind of a robot when it came to nutrient management. And so when you do that over and over again, you become really successful at it, and you get really good at making sure you're getting the right information and it's accurate. And then tying into accuracy, the technology piece of a nutrient management plan. So of course you can write a nutrient management plan just with a pen and a paper and a soil test. But what really, I think, makes it easiest is when you have the technology to do it, meaning a farm management software and the as applied record keeping piece of it. With the rollout of the H2 Ohio program, we put wireless data transfer technology in every single piece of equipment that we had, whether it was yellow or green. So we had the Raven Slingshot and our Terragators, and we had the wireless data transfer with John Deere and all of our John Deere spreaders. And all of that was flowing wirelessly into the online platform, whether that be Slingshot or Operations Center, and then also APIing into our farm management software. And that was just happening automatically. Our applicators didn't have to do anything as long as they were entering their densities correctly and they obviously had the right prescription. Everything worked really well. And when you talk to farmers, a lot of them have a ton of technology in their cabs, but maybe not this type of technology. Like Climate Field View is one that I deal with a lot, but not many farmers apply or broadcast their own BRT fertilizer. Don't get me wrong, there's a big portion of them that do, but even those people that do that, not all of them have the technology in to record that and then the capability to apply that and then interpret it and be able to download it and turn it in. So when you work with a company that specializes in this, obviously all of this is already set up. We're very skilled in manipulating the technology to make it work for management or nutrient management, which unfortunately, to my knowledge, there is nothing out there right now that's specifically built in agriculture for nutrient management. I've said many times over and over again that I wish that I had the knowledge to build something like that. And I'll be really excited the day that that comes about. But those are two pieces that I feel like are most commonly seen at a agribusiness level or a retail level that you don't always see on the farm when it comes to using them for nutrient management. And it makes it such an easy process when you can just enter their crops into their farm. You can have their as applied information flowing directly in, you can write their prescriptions, you can house their soil tests, and then you can run a report that just downloads all of that stuff for you. So when we talk about why I think farmers should work with a specialist, these are the main three things that I find that the farmers over and over and over again are so appreciative of, that they have somebody that they can rely on for these things. And it just takes that piece of worry out for them, that they, number one, they know they're doing the right thing because they're involved in a nutrient management plan. And number two, they know that somebody is taking care of it for them and interpreting it into something that they can understand at a surface level for the most part. So why I think every retail location, regardless of company, should have somebody who specializes in nutrient management. And of course, this kind of ties into the previous slide. It goes hand in hand, but really from a retail perspective, in my opinion, this is one of the best things that Legacy Farmers ever did, was put one person in charge of doing this kind of stuff, keeping up on it. And the feedback that I've gotten from customers So I have this little quote on here, and it says, if people like you, they listen to you, but if they trust you, they'll do business with you. And that's really what this was, right? So when I called a farmer about a nutrient management, at no point in that was I ever trying to sell them anything. All I wanted was for me to be able to write a nutrient management plan that would benefit them, and that was right. So I could turn it in regardless of whether it be NRCS or Soil and Water or whoever, and it would get approved. And they understood that. I didn't have to outright say, hey, listen, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but here's what I think you should do. It was just the conversations that I would have with them over and over and over again that they became to really trust what I had to say. And in turn, then got a lot of their other agronomy inputs with us, because there was this invaluable service that we didn't outright charge for, but provided so much benefit to their operation, and they could rely on and they could trust, and that kind of flowed into all of the rest of the inputs on their farm. So I talked about the trust obviously a lot, and then the relationship outside of sales. Like, I guess from a personal perspective, I'm not a farmer, but like when I go somewhere, it's pretty obvious if all somebody wants to do is sell you something, versus if they're really trying to have a relationship with you and their end goal is what's best for you, in this case a farm, but like for me, the result of something good. When it comes to the farm, I'm not trying to sell them anything. I want what's best for them, and they, I think, can understand that. And then also at the end of the day, it's a mutual benefit, because if they're in a nutrient management plan through a government program, a lot of times there is a monetary kickback to that. And if they have that relationship with you, a lot of times that money is going to come right back to you. You've built that foundation of a good relationship, and a lot of farmers, whether they realize it or not, it's a subconscious thing that they really trust you and they like working with you. And so obviously you can get really good at this if you dedicate a person to it, but I think that at least being involved in it and having somebody who has an understanding of what's going on as the ever-changing guidelines change, whether that be with tri-state or at the government level or anything, and then having that relationship with the farmer and being able to provide those services. So we provide nutrient management, but then we also have fertilizer application, we have spraying applications, you can buy almost any sort of agronomic input from us. And it's kind of a one-stop shop. And if you have this piece of it, that's kind of a relationship outside of sales, it just builds that foundation of trust even more. So all in all, yes, this takes a lot of time in it, and we did have to dedicate somebody to it. I think if it was kind of dispersed amongst all of the salesmen to be responsible for their own, I don't know if it would have worked as well, but having a person like me who this is pretty much one of the main functions of what I do, overall was a huge benefit to Legacy. It may have not have been, if you wrote it down on paper, dollar for dollar, it may not have made a lot of sense, but I think if you look at the overall benefit to Legacy Farmers Cooperative, there was an enormous positive result to having somebody in this role that may have not just, been a dollar for dollar benefit. And everybody here, I think, would agree with that. So when I go to write a nutrient management plan, here are the main things that I ask. And at this point, I have it down to, it's an Excel sheet on my computer. I keep several blank copies of it at all times. So that way, if I accidentally save one, I have another copy of it. But we talked about the benefits to it from a farmer's perspective and then from a retailer's perspective. So now I'm going to put it into like how I actually do it. There's really nothing proprietary about this information. It's not too specific. I think everybody kind of knows this stuff, but here's a little bit about how I do it and how I set it up, because this did kind of evolve over the last 3 years of the H2 Ohio program. And I can finally say that I have it down where I'm really happy with my process for it, but it definitely was a learning curve. So obviously the main components to a basic nutrient management plan is having a soil test that's been pulled within the last 4 years, your crop rotation for your farm, and your nutrient information. And when I get contacted by a farmer to write a nutrient management plan for them or via a salesman, if I don't get this information up front, this is always the email I send back. Most likely I don't need the soil test information because we have that, but I need the crop rotation for all of the fields signed up in the program and your nutrient information. And here's kind of how I go about the nutrient information. So this I have built into an Excel sheet on my computer. And if I'm missing something, somebody please let me know, but I've showed this to hundreds of people at this point, and I think I have all my bases covered. But what I'm looking for is I want to ask a question about every single nutrient you could apply. Now, obviously, most people don't do all of these things, but what I'm trying to do is build a baseline for where they're at with their nutrients, and then take that and interpret it into, or adjust it into what would fit into a nutrient management plan. Now, I always start off this conversation with the farmer by saying, I'm just trying to get a foundation for what your typical practices are right now, but I am probably going, more than likely, we're probably going to have to make some adjustments. Like specifically if you're doing a straight rate bean starter or something like that, that may not translate into nutrient management, but what we're trying to do is just get a baseline for where you're at and what we can improve. So these are all the questions I ask. Obviously, if they don't do it, I put not applicable in that timing column right there. Otherwise, I need the amount and the product. And then same thing in the timing of when they put it on. And then the applicator, most likely it's going to be us, but it could also be the farmer. And if it is the farmer, I kind of run through what the most important things are. Like if they can't get as applied information, or they think they can't get as applied information, can we actually, and they just have never done it before, conversations like that. And then I also talk to them a little bit about soil testing, because I feel like some farmers can get a little bit confused by this, and even myself, I get confused by it sometimes. So I go through what the latest soil test date is. I go through their soil test and I say, okay, it looks like this year you definitely need to renew X, Y, and Z before this will really be an official nutrient management plan. I'll write everything I can, and more than likely all the soil tests are up to date if they're signing up for a nutrient management plan, but not always. So we talk a little bit about the renewal schedule and how that will fit in with their crop rotation, because at the end of the day, we want soil tests every 4 years, but I also want it to fit in agronomically. We don't want to be soil testing in, let's say, corn stalks, and it's going to be beans next year. We always like to soil test before corn, depending on the farmer and his rotation and stuff. So if we can adjust those a little bit to make sure that not only it is good for nutrient management, but it's also good agronomically, that's always the goal. And then obviously we go through yield goals of all the crops in rotation. But this right here is one of the best things that has came out of kind of evolving sheet over time, is having this. It's basically like a pre-nutrient management checklist, and it's got everything on here, and it's made it so like I can't get off the phone with a farmer and be like, oh shoot, I forgot to ask him what his row starter is, or oh shoot, I forgot to ask him how many total pounds of N he puts on his corn. And what this does is we take all of this down, and then I kind of evaluate it while we're on the phone, and I say, okay, I need to look at your soil test and all of that stuff first, but I'm just going to tell you right now that I think we might have to either take down your total pounds of N a couple notches. How do you feel about that? And see if we can spark a conversation out of that. And that all goes back to the trust I talked about in the previous slide. When you're having those conversations and you're really talking about how many total pounds of this are you putting on, can we cut that back a little bit and you still be successful but still fall within these guidelines that have been proven through research. So even if they feel a little bit hesitant about it, I always reassure them like these have been studied, several resources on it. I have different fact sheets that I can send them of, if they are feeling a little bit hesitant about backing down their row starter or their side dress or something like that, to show them all the benefits to doing so and the research behind that. That is such an invaluable service to them that they just simply don't have time for most of the time. And so when they can have a conversation about somebody who understands their operation and this stuff, all in all, it's always been overall positive. I remember being nervous the first time I had to be like, hey, you need to take your row starter from 10 gallons of 1034 to 5, that they were going to be like, no way. And really, all in all, it has been overwhelmingly positive from the farmers, and they really appreciate this. So this is something that I have kind of evolved over time. Obviously, everybody's got their own spin on it, but by far, this is the most valuable thing in my nutrient management plan. And so overall, the key to success for us with the nutrient management plans was consistency. And this kind of shows you what this sheet looks like overall. This is kind of my blank one where I have grower age crop rotation. I put their grid size soil sampling, whether it's 2.5 or 5 acres or zones. And then the package for us, there's 2 different packages. You can get a routine organic package or a complete package, which shows you their micros. And then I list out all of their farms and fields in alphabetical order and put their crop rotation beside that. And then obviously their nutrient information. Now we could house all of this in our farm management software as well. The nutrient information might be a little bit more difficult, but the crop rotation stuff we definitely could. This for me is mainly something that I keep on my computer at all times. So that way, if I'm, in the middle of a work day and I'm working on something else and Farmer Joe's name pops up on my phone, I don't have to answer that phone and then scramble to get on his account and flip through the crop years and try to find this information. As we're talking on the phone, I can see his name pop up, quickly go to his folder on my computer, open up this sheet, and I have basically everything I need to know to be able to answer any questions he has, make any adjustments that he has, and just not waste a bunch of time trying to flip through different crop years or find information. This is just kind of my cheat sheet, and I've created consistency out of this. And so not only do the farmers get a copy of this sheet, but the Soil and Water Office gets a copy of this sheet, and then I have it on my computer. And keeping it consistent with the formatting, with the way that I put things in here, makes it so much easier for everybody else that they're not, or that I'm not changing things all the time. Now, don't get me wrong, as this was in the process of being created, I did change things on it pretty frequently. But just having this as like a universal thing that I send out to everybody, and for the most part, it's relatively easy to understand. You see, I have the farm and field, which if I would put the actual name there. Underneath that, I would put the soil test year. Towards the bottom there, that soil test legend, it basically tells you what year that is good through. So now I've gotten to the point where I can look at those colors and kind of know like, okay, this one's probably going to need renewed. Let me go double check that. And then I have the crop year, the acres, and then the actual crop rotation. Those highlights on the crop years to me are to signal typically when an application is going to be done, when a planned application is going to be done. That's kind of a personal thing. I don't ever really spell that out, but it just helps me to identify, okay, that's going to be corn and we plan to do a VRT application. And then obviously all of the nutrient information. And like I said, it would be great if there was an easy to use program that could display all 4 crop years at one time, but to our program that we use is not like that. And just having something like this in my back pocket that I can pull up really quickly when somebody catches me off guard and like stops in to visit to talk about their nutrient management plan or gives me a call or whatever, I can pull this up, and it's really easy to send. And it's even easier to be like, hey, Farmer Joe, here's your sheet. If you see any mistakes on this, please go ahead and make the changes in red or put a highlight on them, or you can send me an email back. Excel, for the most part, is really universal. Everybody knows how to use it. And so having something like this that's easy to understand, quickly accessible, and can be sent to anybody has been by far the most valuable thing that I've done. And it's all, for the most part, unless somebody farms like a ton of fields, it fits all in one view. So that makes it even easier. Can people ask questions? Is there any questions at this point? Or because I think the next one on here is equip, and I'll quickly go through that. I guess if anybody has any questions, we can keep them to the end.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, or shout them out now, or we can wait till the end. Probably wait till the end would be best.
Yeah. So I'll quickly talk about equip because this is something that I am still, it's kind of an ever-growing, ever-evolving thing for me. I work with, I think I have 10 different 590 equip plans right now that are in the middle of contract. And the biggest difference from my understanding from equip to like H2 Ohio is this right here. I learned how to write equip plans from a previous coworker of mine, and he kind of started this, and then I evolved it. It goes kind of back to Excel. We use Excel for a lot of this nutrient management stuff. but it was this nutrient balancing sheet. And I'll do this sometimes for H2 Ohio to kind of visualize to a grower, like you're putting on 250 pounds of N, but here's how many pounds of N your corn is actually removing to show like the leftover balance. And it's easy to understand, and it's kind of a visual of over application. But for EQIP, I do this for every single nutrient applied, so N, P, and K, and whether that be VRT, wheat starter, side dress, wheat and feed, row starter, things like that. I put every single nutrient on this, and you can probably imagine the more applications a farmer does and the more farms and fields a farmer does, this sheet can get really long. I couldn't fit a screenshot of it of this specific one on this single slide, so I had to kind of cut it in half, but you can see that this plan was clear from 2020 through 2025. I believe this is one that I had, like, it maybe ended in 2023, and then they added on another 2 years once they got to the end of the 2023 contract, and I just kind of built it on top of what was already existing. But for this, it's the most valuable thing that I found with Excel nutrient management, and specifically EQIP, are the if and functions. So if you're not familiar with those, there are a ton of YouTube videos and resources on Google. That's kind of how I figured out how to do this. But basically what I have in here is that fertilizer balance column there towards the bottom left of this slide. That is your after crop balance. So what I do is I put your total nutrients at the top based on the application. And then there's a section in there for your removal based on your yield goal. And then obviously corn with the nitrogen calculator. And then the fertilizer balance at the bottom. And from my understanding, what NRCS is essentially looking for is that these numbers are negative, meaning that you're not applying more than what your crop is removing, which is the goal of any nutrient management plan. This is just a visual of that. And so what I did in here is I made it so that way my variables were corn, soybeans, and wheat, because that was the crops that this grower grew. And it would look at that top column for the rotation, and it would identify, okay, does this say corn, soybeans, or wheat? If it says one of those three, here's the fertilizer applied columns I'm going to look at. So the nutrients applied column, I'm going to subtract it from the removal, which I just punched in there to eliminate having a bunch of different cells in this, and I'm going to spit it out at the bottom. And that sounds really complicated, but once you have it set up in one cell, you can copy and paste it to all of the rest of the cells and just adjust where it's looking at. And then eventually all you have to do is punch in the nutrients and it does it for you automatically. Now, a lot of times once I have this all set up and done, when I go to send it to somebody, I will send it in like a PDF form, because if you've worked with Excel equations before, you know that one little tiny adjustment in them can throw all kinds of errors. And just for fear of somebody accidentally clicking something, I just send it in a PDF format. But this EQIP plans used to take me hours to do because of this part of it. And just finding, making sure you're putting it in the right information, make sure it's balancing okay, making sure your removals are correct. But now that I have this in here, it makes it so much faster that I'm not hunting for things. And this can be just overwhelming. And so basically what I do is I just double check that it's looking at the right cells by double clicking on the fertilizer balance column. And once I know that, I just look at those numbers and I make sure that there's no outliers. You can see in this one, for the most part, they all look relatively good. A lot of times, like probably those 2024 and 2025 columns right there would be not yet established, because we know at some point in this 5-year or 6-year plan that customer is going to have to re-soil test. So sometimes I'll put NA there, other times I'll leave it like this and make a note down at the bottom there that says, disregard 2024 and 2025, because those will be adjusted after the new soil test is pulled. And then I have this weird code of different highlights that I can do with different notes that more so are for me than it is the customer or the NRCS office. But the whole point of this is to talk about the if and statements in Excel and how you can really use those to your benefit when it comes to nutrient management once you get a good grasp on them. I had experience with this because that's where our fertilizer calculators are built, is in Excel with the if and statements, and translating over to a sheet like this was relatively easy. So if anybody has interest or anything, my contact information is on this next slide here. anybody wants to know more about that or how you can use those to your benefit, feel free to send me an email. My email is listed here. Any other questions about any of the other slides? I send that Excel sheet that I used for the basic nutrient management out pretty freely because there's nothing really proprietary about it, I guess. And it's worked out really well. And I'm always looking for feedback on how I could improve that. So if anybody has any, let me know. But basically, that's how I've taken nutrient management and applied it to a retail perspective and made it so from a retailer to a salesman to the farmer to soil and water, everybody's kind of on the same page and can understand what's happening in a specific plan. And really, that's how I view myself, is just to make sure that everything is going smoothly, everybody's on the same page, communication is open, and really at the end of the day, that makes for an extremely successful nutrient management plan on a wide scale.
Perfect. Thank you, Paige, so much. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box below. And then I believe, Sam, it is your turn now.
All right, can you hear me all right, Jocelyn?
Yep, I can hear you good.
All right. Let me see here. Okay. All right, everything good? We can see everything?
I think you're gonna have to switch your screen. We are seeing the kind of notes page. Presentation.
I didn't want to do that either.
That looks better.
Okay, here we go. Now it's just a normal slide.
Yep, if you want to put it in presenter mode, you're more than welcome to.
All right, good deal. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Mullins. I'm the Chief of ODA's Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting. I have given this presentation a couple times throughout the years. It's modified here and there. Most recently, I did this at the Conservation Tillage Conference back in March, and I've updated it slightly. So if you have seen this, bear with me. No two presentations are always the same, but I typically get into the same information. So I will first go over some of the applicable laws and rules that we have, do a summary of our permitted livestock facilities, and then talk about areas of improvement and possible new regulations. I will from time to time refer to our statute, which is Revised Code 903, or Administrative Code, which is 90110. CLMs, permitted facilities, if you're on here, or representatives from those are on here, you know, I always recommend, it's good to be familiar with these. They are fairly lengthy. It does take some time to get through them, but at the end of the day, they are the codes, if you will, that dictate how you operate or how you can operate. So what is a concentrated animal feeding facility? In Ohio, we have state issued permits. You guys are probably more familiar with the term CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation. Those are federally issued permits. We are unique in this country. Most states have some sort of permitting system, whether it is through their Ohio EPA equivalent for the state or their Department of Agriculture. There are certain types of permits out there. For us, we permit any facility at these sizes or larger. For example, 700 mature dairy cows here. We will also permit anything up above that. Most common in Ohio that we have are poultry facilities. We have over 131 facilities here in the state. 66 are layer, 21 pullets, 44 broilers, followed by swine, dairy, beef, horses, and turkeys. I didn't mention this in the previous slide, but we also have another category called a major concentrated animal feeding facility, which is 10 times the size needed to be a permitted facility. All of our MCAFs right now our poultry facilities. For example, any poultry facility or layer facility over 820,000 birds has to be considered an MCAF, and any pullet facility over 1.25 million birds has to be considered an MCAF as well.
Hey, Sam,
Yep.
I'm going to stop you right there. We are not able to see the slides that they are advancing. We're still stuck on the beginning.
Okay. So we are sharing the wrong screen here. Well, it's telling me that it is. I'm going to stop sharing and reset. Okay, is that better there, Jocelyn?
Yep, that looks
okay, perfect.
better.
I'm sorry, I've been having technical problems with Zoom all morning, and it just has bled over into this presentation, so I apologize for that.
You're fine. It happens. We get it.
Okay, so currently we have 291 facilities across the state. This is a distribution of where they are at. They're primarily located in the northwest part of the state, but they are kind of scattered in the northeast part of the state and through the central part of the state. You can tell, if you know anything about Ohio's geology and the landscape, you can tell, why it's nice and flat, ag dominated Northwest Ohio. We have Appalachia, Ohio in the southeast and in the southern western part of Ohio. So the larger livestock facilities are primarily concentrated in the northern and the western part of the state. And then we have 4 inspectors that cover these areas. These counties that are color coded are the counties that our inspectors are located in. If we have a county that has 2 colors, that just means that we have 2 inspectors that cover that county. That's not an actual delineation of the boundaries that those inspectors cover. So the 2 types of permits that we issue are permits to install. Pretty straightforward. Any facility that's looking to construct up to the size of a permitted facility, or maybe they're already permitted and they want to expand, they have to submit a permit to install application for us. I'm not going to go into this too much today. Our focus today is more with manure application, but just understand that up front with these permitted facilities, there's a lot of information that they have to supply us. We do an extensive review of the site, the location, the engineering and construction principles of primarily the manure storage, but also where the animals are housed. And then we also issue permits to operate. Permits to operate cover different management plans that a facility has to have. I'm going to spend most of today's presentation going over the manure management plan. But as equally important, in most cases, we have an insect and rodent control plan, and then mortality management, emergency response, and operating records. Again, today I'll be spending most of my time talking about manure management. Within the manure management plan, we have 2 primary focal points: the structures, the equipment used, where the manure is stored, how it's transferred from point A to point B. We are reviewing all of that information from a operational standpoint. But really, and the main reason that our program is kind of there to begin with, or here to begin with, is for the land application of manure and nutrient management. So Paige just went through, and I think she's referencing primarily NRCS 590, which requires soil tests to be at least 4 years old. We require them to be at least 3 years old, and covering, 21 sample cannot represent more than 25 acres. A very key component of a nutrient management plan are soil tests. And then we have to look at the physical aspects of where that manure is getting applied: soil type, soil slope, field boundaries, setbacks, things of that nature. And every manure management plan that we go through, we are going through every single field under the control of the facility where they apply manure, and looking at these characteristics. We also inspect our facilities. from a federal EPA perspective and their CAFO permits, which are through the NPDES program, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. I know that's a mouthful, but the NPDES program is what regulates CAFOs nationally. Their recommendation is to do inspections once every 5 years. We are conducting inspections at least once a year. Most of our facilities are twice a year. Couple occasions where we increase inspections due to complexity, or maybe there's a current enforcement case, or maybe we have a history of non-compliance. We may bump inspections up to 3 or 4 times per year, but in most cases, we're looking at 1 or 2 times per year for our inspections. And in my opinion, as important as the upfront reviewing the engineering principles of these facilities, to me, when it comes to ensuring consistent compliance with regulations and with nutrient management, I do feel like our inspections are one of the most vital aspects of our program. CLMs. So here I'm just listing, what regulates CLMs, what the requirement is, where it can be found in code, where it can be found both in statute and code, and then what regulations kind of are applicable to CLMs. And so 90307, gives the ODA authority to develop to regulate or have the CLM program. This Administrative Code 901-10106 kind of dictates who becomes a CLM, what a CLM is. And then 901-10210 through 10216, those are the management rules, if you will, for land application nutrient management. At least, so who has to be a CLM? At least one person on an MCAF. So our poultry facilities out there with over 820,000 layers, or 1.25 million broilers, they have to have at least one CLM on staff, and that person has to be associated or at least involved in the manure management aspect of that. Some of these facilities are generating tens of thousands of tons of manure per year, and it takes very intense management. But really where CLMs are most applicable throughout the state are those individuals that are buying, selling, transporting, some other involvement with manure on a commercial applicator basis. So any individual that land applies, transfers over 4,500 dry tons of solid manure or 25 million gallons of liquid manure on an annual basis, they are required to be a CLM. Okay, so we're going to jump into the meat of this presentation. So last year, or actually at the beginning of this year, I did an assessment of all the enforcement cases that we had in DLEP last year. We had 56 enforcement cases, and 25 of those were related to manure application. And the reason I did this is when I do this presentation, whether it's at our CLM training that we hold here at ODA, or it's at CTC or Manure Science Review, wherever I'm giving this presentation, I like to focus on where can we improve. And I didn't want this to seem arbitrary when I say, hey, we need to work on soil tests, or we need to work on setbacks. So I just wanted to kind of support my arguments, and going back and looking at those cases from last year, which we had a lot higher amount of enforcement cases than we generally have. I'd say consistently from year to year, we're usually around 20 to 30 enforcement cases. And last year we had almost double that. So I was curious and to see if I could support my claims for where we can improve. And generally I was I was valid in the things that I've been talking about over the years. So when I went through these enforcement cases, I can see, typically we're going to have setbacks. Number one, setbacks is probably the one violation that we see the most when it comes to land application, even for those, and Eric and Megan can probably say this in their next presentation, but setbacks, even if you're trying to follow setbacks. Sometimes it just happens. Maybe manure moves on the surface a little bit if you're surface applying and gets into a setback area. With poultry litter application, you know, the application, you sometimes can't even see where that manure is getting applied. And though there's equipment and technology out there to help with setbacks, it happens from time to time. So I was not surprised to see setbacks at the top. And I wasn't surprised to see manure application record keeping at the top. We have an extensive amount of information that is required to be recorded. You know, failing to put on a soil test is something that we see common. Failing to include the soil test phosphorus concentration on the manure application record, or failing to document concentrated surface flow areas and the inspections of those. Those are things that we see quite frequently. But where I've had, you know, where I've been disappointed the most, especially this past year, was where we have phosphate application restrictions, which is, you know, 9 times out of 10, phosphorus is going to be our limiting factor when it comes to determining application rates and to looking at what that limiting factor is going to be. And so from a nutrient perspective, you know, phosphate, it has to be a priority for our producers and for our CLMs, and they've got to look at that. So seeing that still at the top, and we have been putting a lot of emphasis on this particularly over the last 7 years, to still see that we're having issues and violations to phosphate application is disappointing. You know, manure discharges, I'd like to see that number at 0. You know, we have that tied over here at 3. You know, obviously, manure discharges, we want to minimize those. We'd like to see that at 0. But again, the nature of our program and why we're here to begin with is that manure discharges do happen. They can happen on an accident. I don't think anybody anymore, you know, to see a case of negligence where manure is purposefully being discharged is few and far between. You know, these are generally going to happen as an accident, but they still happen. Number 4 here, manure applied to frozen or snow-covered ground. Another disappointing thing to see. I started at ODA in 2015. Between 2015 and 2021, we didn't have a single case of manure getting applied to frozen ground, at least on the DLEP side. I know there were a couple cases through Soil and Water Conservation and ODA's Division of Soil and Water Conservation. You know, we do have a couple cases of frozen ground application, but it's slightly different in that if you're a permitted facility or you're a CLM, you're prohibited statewide from applying manure to frozen or snow-covered ground unless you get pre-approval from ODA. And we had 5 of those cases in 2022 where approval was not obtained before applying there. And then number 5, 6, and 7, you know, things again that we see from time to time. Soil sampling requirements, again, kind of disappointing because we've been hammering this for decades, that soil sampling and having that test is vital for nutrient management, for manure application. And to see manure applications occur without an up-to-date or a valid soil test is disappointing. It is a fundamental aspect of nutrient management, and I can't overemphasize that having an up-to-date soil test is a requirement. Number 6 here, weather forecast restrictions. Again, not a huge deal. This is a case of where the forecast was actually referenced, but they did not include an actual record to verify that they consulted with the forecast before land application. And then emergency response, we just didn't get notified in time after a discharge occurred, and that only happened 1 time last year. So that's pretty good. Generally, our producers and our CLMs are very good. If they run into any issues, they will kind of call us pretty quickly. So this is the slide I was mentioning. This one and the next one where I've pinpointed areas over the years where we can improve, and right off the bat, we can tell that 5 of those items from the list I just showed are things that I've been talking about over the years. On the next slide, these are additional items that I've talked about over the years. Here are 2 that were also on the list that again, areas that I think we can improve, and why I say that is through the enforcement cases that we are dealing with. So other ones that I will cover today, I'll talk a little bit about manure sampling characterization, evaluating soil conditions, and monitoring tile outlets. Those are three that are probably always going to be on a generalized presentation that I'm giving today. So land application setbacks. Again, with CLMs, if you've heard me talk before and give presentations, I do like to talk about preparation, what you can do before you step into the field. I know that's not always, I can say that this is more like a perfect scenario, because I know sometimes CLMs are getting called, hey, I've got 1 million gallons of my in my hog pit. You know, can you come tomorrow and do land application, or can you come today? So sometimes they're rolling into the farm. The producer may be giving them a couple fields to apply to, and it may be the first time they've ever been there. So preparation has to happen quickly. So my argument against setbacks is, number one, CLM should know their setbacks, but number two, we are all now carrying these computers in our pockets through smartphones, and every single one of them has some sort of mapping or GPS system on there where you can look at almost real-time satellite imagery and see that, okay, there's a waterway running through this field. There are 3 houses along the eastern edge. Here's the road. Maybe there's a roadside ditch. So there is some things that you can do without stepping foot in the field to know where your sensitive areas are, know where your setbacks are. We're seeing this as we go through some of our permit reviews. We will see setbacks being violated. We are way too close to this waterway here. In some cases, it looks like application maybe went through that waterway. Same thing here in this field, where we have waterways all the way through with what appears to be manure applied right up against it. These could be surface swales, which we do have setbacks to, but also down here it appears that possibly we were too close to this ditch. Now this might have a 35-foot vegetative buffer, in which case they can apply right up to it. But at the end of the day, my whole point of showing this slide is that as we go through our permit review and we look at up-to-date satellite imagery, we are seeing these things. We can note these things, and we can hone in or focus on these things when we do our inspections with these facilities. Here is a list of our setbacks. Hopefully you guys get a copy of this presentation. If you don't, this is in our code. This is in Ohio Administrative Code 901-10-214, one of the appendixes. The two most applicable are going to be surface application and surface incorporation, so column 2 and 4. The only time you're going to be using column 3 is if you get pre-approval for wintertime application, that I'm going to focus in on a little bit here in a minute. And then those of you guys that are doing any stockpiling or staging with manure, that would be column 1 there. But we have these all listed out. Again, these are available online, but if you need a copy of these, you can always email me and get a copy of this appendix. Record keeping, pretty straightforward. Hey, maintain complete and accurate records. Again, CLMs and permanent facilities have record keeping requirements. It's up to them to know what those record keeping requirements are, though again, we do an extensive amount of work with the producers or the CLMs through inspections and through our training. So knowing what needs to be recorded it's all written down what you need to be recording. And of course, we do have our own records that we provide to our facilities. This is an example of a manure application record that we've created that's all encompassing of kind of any scenario, whether you're doing liquid manure application or solid manure application. This is the information that needs to be recorded. Again, if you need a copy of this, you can email me and I can send you the actual version of this in PDF or in Word form. Soil tests, like I mentioned, it's just bottom line, you cannot apply manure from our perspective, from a DLEP perspective. If you're applying manure without an up-to-date soil test, there are multiple violations that can be associated with that. Number one, you're just simply not following the law by saying, hey, you need to have an up-to-date soil test. Every 3 years, one soil test representing no more than 25 acres. But the biggest part of it is you cannot conduct your phosphorus risk assessment procedure without that test. And therefore, any nutrients that are applied without consulting that test would be in violation of that assessment. So keep and maintain accurate soil tests. That goes to facilities, that goes to CLMs, and I know this has been a subject of debate for years now on what CLMs are responsible for and what they're not responsible for. But from our perspective, if you are conducting a land application, whether the facility is permitted or not, and you're moving that manure without a test, you're in violation of your land application restrictions. Nutrient application rates. A lot of times, again, I'm going to say preparation up front. It's much easier for facilities, to have a manure management plan, to be prepared to do that upfront work, to know that, in fields X, Y, Z, I can do 6,000 gallons per acre or 2 tons per acre to stay within my phosphate application restrictions or my nitrogen application rate restrictions. So it does take time for evaluating and doing that prep work, but the more you can do upfront, the better off, the more prepared you're going to be when you get out in the field and you start doing that work. And we do have tools that can help. We generated this spreadsheet several years ago. This is a one-stop shop where you can develop a 5-year nutrient management plan for one site-specific, one land application field or land application area. You can plug in soil test information. You can plug in manure, nutrient characterization information. You can put in your anticipated crop yields, et cetera, and develop an entire plan based around that one field. These takes all the guesswork out. It's just plug and chug and go. Okay, what do you need? I think we all know kind of what we need. We need our representative manure analysis for calculating nutrient application rates. We need our up-to-date soil test. We need to understand next crops or what the crop rotation is, especially if you're planning on putting down 2, 3, 4 years worth of phosphorus. If you can, knowing that crop rotation is important. And then obviously time and method of application, which impacts plant available nitrogen, is also important. Okay, I've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to pick up my pace just a little bit here. So frozen or snow covered ground. Again, bottom line with this is, as a CLM or a permitted facility, applying liquid manure to frozen or snow covered ground, you have to get pre-approval from ODA beforehand. And it's going to be difficult. I will say it's going to be difficult to get approval from us. We will try to exhaust every other option that we can to get that manure to either be stored in a different location, or maybe there's an emergency situation where we can put in a temporary holding pond or something like that. And then when solid manure, if there's less than 50% moisture in that manure, our recommendation is going to be to stockpile that manure. So bottom line, you cannot apply manure without approval from ODA on frozen or snow covered ground. Manure ponding is something relatively new that I've been covering. It's been things that I've included kind of on the surface level, but I needed to dive deeper into this given some cases that we've had with manure ponding and manure moving on the surface. And so basically, to explain what this is that if you're applying liquid manure, or let's say you applied solid manure and there was a rain that occurred after, whether it was forecasted or not, if you have any manure laden water moving on the surface and pooling in an area, let's say a low area, that you didn't want. It's unwanted accumulation of liquid manure, manure-laden water on the surface. That's how we are classifying that. We're generally looking at is that if land application occurs and 24 hours goes by and you still have manure ponding in low-lying areas or anywhere throughout the field, we're going to call that ponding. So we are saying essentially that your application rate should have been adjusted to a lower rate to prevent ponding and to prevent that surface movement of manure. So where are we seeing it and how can it be prevented? I think where we're seeing it the most is in those low-lying areas. If we have a higher application rate on the surface without any tillage and we have some movement on the surface, that is a likely scenario. We are seeing it at the end rows. If somebody's draglining manure at the end rows where they're making their turns, and as those of you that dragline know, when you make a turn, you kind of overlap in some areas, and that can increase what the application rate is in a very specific area. And so that's, watching your turns, increasing rate when you're turning, things of that nature. Given that there's a lack of technology to help with that process right now, to eliminate that overlapping and that over application, my main recommendation, my main focus right now is just, be aware of it, understand what your soils may be doing. If it's a heavy clay versus loam, just know what you're getting yourself into and try to avoid those issues of ponding. So this is an example. Okay, this is unfortunately in this particular case, we had 2 inches of an unforecasted rain event occur on this field after land application. This was approximately 36 hours after the start of land application when I was out there, and we did have manure ponding in several areas. Even though there was tillage that had occurred, we did have manure laden water ponding in those fields. So that's a great example here. This is less of an obvious case, but you can see this is about 4 days at this point after land application, and we have still manure ponding and moving on the surface down into low-lying areas. In fact, it looks like the operator may have even driven through some of this manure heavy laden areas during application. So this is also considered ponding. And here is another case. This one was about 24 hours, maybe a little over 24 hours after land application. There was a little bit of precipitation during this complaint investigation, but you can see that manure just kind of moved on the surface down into this low-lying area and was ponding. So that's what ponding is. That's what we're trying to promote as to avoid. Luckily, we don't see a lot of these cases, but we do see enough to where we feel like we need to emphasize this. So weather forecast stuff. Okay, look, but on this one, 50% chance of precipitation of amounts exceeding 1/2 inch. So if the forecast is calling for that in 24 hours, after you start land application, or 24 hours after land application, basically what we're saying is you cannot surface apply manure 24 hours ahead of an event like this. You can incorporate, you can inject right up to that rainstorm, but this is really to restrict surface application of manure before these forecasted events. And then what do we require on record keeping? We are requiring that they maintain the forecast, but we're also requiring that you record the actual weather information 24 hours prior to application, what occurred during application, and what happened after application. There are a lot of programs like the Field Application Resource Monitor through Ohio State or the NOAA weather graphs that can help with this information or maintaining this information. Save those, take a screenshot or whatever, save them. If you're not going to print them out, we do accept electronic copies. Just make sure that as a manure applicator, whether you're a permanent facility CLM or just a non-permanent facility, for example, or a non-CLM applicator, having this information is vital in the event of discharges or manure spills. Okay, manure sampling. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to skip ahead a little bit. all I'm saying here is make sure you have accurate and representative samples. If you land apply manure from a pond that you generally are mixing, make sure that your sample is going to be representative of mixed manure. If it's a pond that you irrigate from and you don't mix it, and you're pulling from the top level of that pond, just get a sample from that top level of or multiple samples, I should say, but try to get whatever is representative of what you are land applying. It's much easier to do that for solid manure than it is for liquid manure. So on our part, our inspectors have to be able to kind of decipher if a manure sample is representative. So we have been emphasizing this for years. This is another thing that we've been seeing over time, where soil tests and what we have anticipated with nutrient application rates aren't really jiving together. And so we've kind of pinpointed that our manure samples haven't been as representative. You know, maybe they're underselling how much phosphorus is in that manure versus what's actually being land applied. Evaluating soil conditions is very straightforward in most cases. It's, you know, we want to see typical conditions like dry, cracked, wet, muddy, how much cover there is, whether the field is drained versus undrained. Those are all important aspects. From a liquid manure standpoint, available water capacity, I could spend an hour going over how to do these, but those CLMs and producers out there that deal with available water capacity know that this assessment needs to be done before land application of liquid manure every single day. Monitoring tile outlets, pretty obvious on our standpoint. If you're dealing with liquid manure, make sure if that field has tile drainage that you are monitoring those tiles frequently. You know, we at this point don't have a requirement on how many times you have to monitor, other than it needs to be monitored during and after application. As far as new regulations, we don't have anything too extensive right now. We have been over the last couple decades trying to obtain authority from the federal EPA to issue CAFO MPDS permits. They denied us back in November of last year. So on that front, there's really nothing new from a law perspective or regulations, but we are working on things this year. We do have several meetings throughout the year with our CAF advisory board to kind of look at regulations. So there are things that will be updated. And so hopefully next year I will be able to spend more time talking about some of the changes that we have. As far as what we're hearing from the public, right now we're hearing that you know, there's a huge push for permitting medium-sized facilities. For example, dairy facilities that have 200 to 699 mature dairy cows. We are hearing from the public we want permits. Same thing with swine facilities from 750 to 2499. Reduction in soil test thresholds. Right now we have different categories depending on the phosphorus soil test level. A lot of environmentalists and a lot of people within the public are wanting to, you know, reduce those significantly to be more equivalent to what we're seeing in like tri-state fertilizer versus what we see in NRCS 590. Require additional treatment processes. You know, this is a dream. You know, that not a. I shouldn't say a dream. This is something that's pushed. That's just really not that realistic. You know, to have, let's say, for example, a 2,400 head, or let's say a 5,000 head hog facility that produces 1.5 million gallons of manure a year. The value of that manure is, you know, the value is there in raw form. To ask a facility to put in a treatment process for 1.5 million gallons is just not cost effective. So I don't ever see anything like this being mandated, but we are starting to see treatment processes become more prevalent in the livestock world, particularly through anaerobic digestion, nutrient removal, dewatering, things of that nature. And the last one down here is, you know, we've had calls from time to time to place moratoriums on new livestock facilities in the Western Lake Erie Basin. I don't know how that's going to happen. There's just no authority out there that really can place a moratorium. And if the governor did from an executive standpoint, I think it would be shot down pretty quickly by the legislator. Okay. All right. So I know I went over my time. I apologize. I have a tendency to do that. But if there are questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them now, or you can email me. I have my email here at the end. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Sam, Megan, and Eric. You guys are up. And if anyone has questions for Sam, like you said earlier, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we will get that to them at the end. At the end of this webinar, there will be a poll for credits that will be available to you. So please stick around if you need credits.
Can you hear us and can you see this?
I can hear you. I cannot see your screen.
Okay, let's try that again. How about now?
I can see your screen.
Perfect. All right, we good now?
We're good.
All right, hello everyone. This is Megan and Eric Dresbach, and we are manure haulers from Southern Ohio, but we work all over the state, parts of Indiana, and we've worked in Michigan before. We do everything from agitation to application, and we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. We have a drag lines and honey wagons and semis and everything that goes along with that. But today we are going to be focusing on our dredge. Okay. Go ahead, Dad. You can...
Okay, so the dredge is the best way I can describe it is a snow blower on a pontoon boat. So it has an auger head. We're able to go 15 feet down below the top of the water and harvest the rich product off the bottom. Done a lot of sow lagoons over the years. We've done water intakes, dairy farms, different things, paper mill sludge. Typically on a sow product, we can get to 120 pounds of phosphorus per 1,000 gallons and or richer. This makes it a marketable product. And we can put on a semi and run it, 7-10 miles down the road and apply it and really make a difference. Again, depending on the area of the state, H2O and Western Basin, we have to do the phosphorus analysis and apply accordingly. So the dredge is really a tool in the toolbox to harvest the solids out of the lagoon, market it, and increase the storage capacity of the lagoon.
This is a picture of the cutter head, just to show that we really do get to the bottom of things. As you can see, this head is full of trash. So we do have to do this every couple of days, bring the head up, remove everything. But we can really explain to the customer, be like, we are pulling this product off of the bottom of the lagoon. And like Dad said, it is very marketable. It's worth a lot per gallon. And that means we can move this product farther away from beside the barn. And with making an assumption that the fields next to the barn are high in phosphorus, we really do need to put it on a truck and get it moved farther away from the farm. And this product, because it makes it more economical to do that. This is it set up. It's cable driven. So we have anchor points on each side. And because it's an 8-foot head, we put spray paint lines on side of the lagoon, so we knew where to move the points to, but we are getting every pass exactly where it needs to be. So really just trying to increase storage, but doing a good job for our customer to get everything that's in that lagoon and get it out. And then this is another aerial view. Really proud of this job site. We had everything here. The first few weeks, we had the 3 semis running to the honey wagon. And then Dad and I left with the honey wagon and the dragline crew stayed. And we really got several million gallons out of here and spread across this customer's land base.
One thing about the dredge project, we always get accused of smelling up the neighborhood. That product's aged in the bottom, almost, I don't know, compost the right term. Mary Wicks could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't have any odor. It's black. It looks like tar, has very, very little smell. So we we broadcast this product because you don't want to put a enriched into a 30-inch trench or on 30-inch centers. So it's broadcast and then incorporated by a disc within 24 hours to meet all the requirements. So people ask us, why a dredge versus agitation boat? And I think this chart shows it out. 15-foot deep lagoon. It might only have 12 foot of water. You got 6 foot of solids. You got 1 million gallons per foot, which is close to what the pictures were there. To empty that lagoon out, if you use a dredge and haul an enriched product, you're only talking about 6 million gallons. If you try to haul the whole lagoon, you got 10 or 11 million. We're hauling it at least twice to maybe 3 times thicker. Agitation boats run somewhere around $350 an hour, and you'd have to run it for a day or two before you ever started, and then 8 to 10 hours every day you were there. So you're looking at a huge expense of an agitation boat, and more than twice as much product to move. Presents a lot more expense involved. So that's where the dredge really fits. We've done real well to sow lagoons over the years, and like I said, we've done some other ones too, but sow lagoons has kind of been our niche lately. So, you know, flipping over on the dairy lagoon, we can remove solids, remove sand. Been doing this since '87, and in my book, sand is a 4-letter word. Luckily, we've seen the dairy industry switch over to sand lanes, and we got a lot less sand in the pond, but we still have a good bit of solids. And the other thing, we see a lot of ponds that are, you know, 12 or 15 foot deep, and they've got 5 or 7 foot of solids. So and that puts them in a bind because they can't get from one season to the next for application. And if we can go in there and take 4 or 5 feet out, it really makes a difference and makes their life a lot easier.
That was very quick. We did a very quick overview, but wanted to be conscious of everyone's time. So it looks like we do have a few more minutes here. Does anyone have any questions?
I know Paige kind of stepped off already too, but if y'all have any questions for any of the speakers today, please feel free to reach out or put them in the Q&A box below. And then if you don't get any questions here in the next minute or so, we'll pop that poll up for you guys for the credits.
Hey, Eric, this is Sam Mullins. I do have a question for you guys.
Go ahead.
So what are you seeing is in terms of how often anaerobic lagoons, particularly at sow units, are they getting cleaned out? It's around 15 to 20 years, right? Are we speeding that up, or does it seem to be?
I think we should speed it up, Sam, but yeah, majority of the lagoons we've been in has been in that 15 to 20 year range. And like I said, they're running about 5 or 6 feet of solids in a 12 or 15 foot lagoon. And the reason we know that, there's a tool called a sledge judge. It's basically like a soil sample probe. It's got a flopper on the end of it, and nobody at work volunteers, but I get to go out on a rowboat with a hollow tube 1.5 inches in diameter, and I actually plug that pond in several different spots to get an idea of the average depth. And that's a service we provide, and that's one way we can come up with good, accurate numbers before we start a project. That sledge judge gets a good bit of use to know what we got going on out there.
Good deal.
Not seeing any other questions in the Q&A. The credit poll is open, so please fill that out if you guys need that. I'll stay on here for a little while, make sure everybody gets a chance on that. But other than that, you guys have a good day. And hopefully the rest of this week is temperatures of your liking. And once again, thank you to all our speakers. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Megan and Eric. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to do this.
Yep, you're welcome.
No problem. You're welcome.